Today is July the 28th, 2026. Picture a quiet farming village in eastern Turkey, wheat fields rolling out toward the Euphrates River, where, for generations, nobody thought twice about the tall earthen hill sitting on the edge of town. Locals walked past it every day. Then archaeologists started digging into that hill, and what they found underneath rewrote the timeline of an entire region. Buried beneath layers of Ottoman, Roman, and Byzantine history was something nobody expected. A temple, 6,000 years old, built by people we barely have a name for, complete with altars, sacrificial channels, and objects. That suggests these were not simple farmers at all. Stay with me, because this discovery is stranger and more sophisticated than almost anyone predicted. Welcome back to the channel. If this is your first time here, this is where we uncover the world's most fascinating archaeological discoveries, the digs that rarely make the front page but completely change what we thought we knew about the ancient world. Today we are heading to Tadım Fortress and Mound in Elazığ province, eastern Turkey, where a team of archaeologists has uncovered what is now believed to be the oldest known religious structure in the region. And by the end of this video, you're going to understand why researchers are calling this one of the most important finds in eastern Anatolia in years. Before we get into it, if you like digging into stories like this, go ahead and subscribe and turn on notifications, because we cover a new mystery or discovery every single week. Let's start with the location, because it matters more than people realize. Tadım Fortress and Mound, known locally as Tadım Höyü, sits in the village of Tadım in Elazığ province in the eastern part of Turkey. This is not a random patch of land. It sits close to the Euphrates River, in a region that has functioned for thousands of years as a crossroads between Mesopotamia to the south and Anatolia to the north and west. That location alone makes it one of the more strategically important spots in the ancient Near East, a kind of natural highway junction for trade, migration, and cultural exchange between civilizations we usually think of as separate. The mound itself is enormous. It rises approximately 35 meters, or about 115 feet, above the surrounding landscape, and spans roughly 210 by 160 meters, which is close to the footprint of several football fields side by side. When you see a mound of that size in archaeology, it almost always means one thing. This was not occupied briefly. Mounds like this build up over centuries, sometimes millennia, as one settlement is built, abandoned, buried, and rebuilt. Directly on top of the last one, layer after layer, generation after generation. Every layer is effectively its own time capsule. The excavation at Tadım has been running for several seasons now, coordinated by Turkey's Ministry of Culture and Tourism, working alongside the Elazığ Museum Directorate and local provincial authorities. And the upper layers of the site told a familiar story at first. Archaeologists found material from the Ottoman period, the Seljuk period, going further back to Roman and Byzantine occupation, and material dating to around 3500 BCE. That alone would already be a fairly rich site. But it was what they found, as they kept digging deeper, that changed everything. In a specific area of the mound, identified in excavation records simply as the 80 to 81 numbered grid sections, researchers uncovered a temple complex dating to the late Chalcolithic and early Bronze Age, roughly 6,000 years old. This is being described as the first known temple ever discovered in that city and region, which is a significant claim because it means that for as long as archaeologists have been excavating in Elazığ, nothing at this scale or this age, dedicated specifically to religious ritual, had ever turned up before. So what exactly is inside this temple complex? This is where the discovery gets genuinely unsettling and also genuinely fascinating from a historical standpoint. Archaeologists uncovered what has been described as a blood channel, a carved passage running through the temple floor that contained both human and animal bones. Alongside it sat an altar stone marked with visible knife cuts. Taken together, researchers interpret this as strong physical evidence that both animal and, in some cases, human sacrifice were part of the religious practices carried out at this site, offerings made to whatever gods or spiritual forces this community believed governed their world. It is worth pausing here because it is easy to hear human sacrifice and picture something purely brutal or chaotic. But the physical evidence actually points towards something much more structured. This was not improvised violence. There was a purpose-built channel specifically engineered to carry blood away from the altar. There were 4 separate podiums, believed to have functioned as offering platforms, arranged in a deliberate architectural layout. There was a sacred hearth, a dedicated fire feature, which in many ancient religious systems represented a permanent, tended flame at the center of ritual life. This was organized religious infrastructure, built with intention, likely maintained and used repeatedly over a long period of time, not a single isolated event. Beyond the ritual architecture itself, the artifacts recovered from the site tell us even more about who these people were day to day. Archaeologists recovered an agricultural stamp seal, a small carved object historically used to mark ownership or authenticate agreements, often tied to grain storage, trade, or property rights. They found pottery in what is known as the Nakhchivan style, a distinctive ceramic tradition linked to early Transcaucasian cultures spreading through the wider Caucasus and eastern Anatolian region. They uncovered arrowheads, everyday tools, and a spindle, a simple tool used for spinning wool or fiber into thread, hinting at a community that was producing textiles, not just farming and hunting. And then there were the figurines. Archaeologists have recovered several stylized idol figurines at the site, crafted from stone, clay, bone, and wood, believed to have been used in devotional practices. These are small, deliberately shaped human or human-like forms, the kind of objects that suggest personal or household-level religious practice existing, alongside the larger communal temple structure. In other words, this was not a society where religion happened only at one central building. It appears to have been woven into daily domestic life as well. Amit Demirda, the provincial director of culture and tourism in Elazığ, has been one of the leading voices describing the significance of this find. He has emphasized that this represents the first known temple structure ever identified in the region's history, and that the discovery offers a genuinely rare window into how people in this specific corner of the world lived, worked, and worshipped 6,000 years ago. He has also pointed out that the excavation site is large, and that the team believes there is more to find as digging continues, possibly even older layers of history waiting underneath what has already been uncovered. That last point turned out to be more accurate than anyone might have guessed at the time. In the months following the temple discovery, archaeologists working the same mound pushed even deeper into its layers. They found something that pushed the timeline back even further. Buried in the Neolithic layers beneath the temple, researchers uncovered a stone seal, dated to approximately 7,500 years old. This is being described as the first artifact of its kind ever found in the city, and it is genuinely significant because stone seals like this one are typically interpreted by archaeologists as evidence of organized property ownership, trade exchange systems, and early administrative or proto-bureaucratic practices. Essentially, a society sophisticated enough to need a way of marking "this belongs to me" or "this transaction is authorized" is a society that has already moved well beyond simple subsistence living. Alongside that seal, the deeper Neolithic layers produced 3 separate sacred hearths, more pottery in the Karaz tradition, a type of early Transcaucasian ceramic, associated with the wider Kura-Araxes cultural sphere, along with arrowheads, everyday tools, additional stylized figurines, and decorated vessels, featuring geometric patterns and mountain goat motifs. Mountain goats, or ibex, show up repeatedly in early Anatolian and Caucasian art and symbolism, often associated with fertility, mountain landscapes, and in some interpretations, connections to sacred or supernatural realms. Their repeated appearance on pottery from this site suggests a shared visual and symbolic language, stretching across a wide region, not something isolated to one small village. Put all of this together, and what emerges is a picture of a community at Tadım that existed far earlier and functioned at a far higher level of social organization than anyone had documented in this region before. We are talking about people who, 7,500 years ago, were already marking property and managing exchange systems. By around 6,000 years ago, that same location had developed into a settlement substantial enough to support a dedicated temple complex, complete with structured ritual architecture, a functioning altar, and evidence of organized religious practice involving both animal and human sacrifice. This was not a scattering of primitive huts. This was a functioning society with economic systems, craft production including textiles and pottery, religious infrastructure, and enough continuity to keep building on the exact same spot for thousands of years. It's worth being clear about what researchers are and are not claiming here, because it's easy for headlines to run further than the evidence supports. Nobody excavating at Tadım is suggesting this was some lost advanced civilization with technology beyond its era, and nobody is claiming certainty about every detail of what these rituals meant to the people practicing them. What the physical evidence does support is more measured, and honestly, just as compelling. This was a genuinely early, genuinely sophisticated society, developing complex religious, economic, and social systems, at a point in history most people assume was still fairly primitive everywhere on Earth. The blood channel and altar tell us about belief and ritual. The stamped seals and pottery styles tell us about trade networks stretching well beyond the immediate village. The figurines tell us religion extended into personal, everyday life. Together, these pieces of evidence support each other, which is exactly the kind of corroboration archaeologists look for before treating a claim as well-established rather than speculative. There's also a broader regional story unfolding here that goes beyond just one mound. Tadım is not the only site being actively excavated in Elazığ province right now. Archaeological teams are simultaneously working at Harput Castle, Tadım Fortress, and Salkaya village, all part of a wider coordinated effort by Turkish cultural authorities to document and preserve this region's layered multi-thousand-year history before it is lost to time, erosion, or development. Eliza sits in a part of the world that has been continuously inhabited and fought over for millennia, precisely because of its position along the Euphrates and its role connecting Mesopotamian and Anatolian trade routes. Every one of these digs adds another piece to a much larger puzzle about how civilization actually spread and developed across this corridor of the ancient Near East. What makes Tadım stand out within that bigger picture is the sheer time depth in a single location. You have Ottoman-era material at the top. Beneath that, Seljuk-era remains. Beneath that, Roman and Byzantine layers. Beneath that, material from around 3500 BCE. And beneath all of that, the 6,000-year-old temple complex with its blood channel and altar. And beneath even that, the 7,500-year-old Neolithic layer with the stone seal and sacred hearths. That is not a site with one interesting layer. That is a site where nearly every layer you dig through has something to say, a genuine vertical timeline of human settlement stretching back roughly 7,500 years in one single spot. For archaeologists, sites like this are exactly why targeted, patient excavation matters so much more than treasure hunting. Nobody walked up to this mound and immediately found a temple. It took multiple excavation seasons, careful stratigraphic work identifying which layer belonged to which era, and a methodical grid-by-grid approach before that specific 80 to 81 numbered section revealed the ritual architecture underneath. That is also exactly why Demirda and his team believe there's more still to find. If the mound has already produced a continuous 7,000-plus year sequence of human occupation, there is a reasonable chance that further excavation could reveal even older layers, additional structures, or entirely new categories of artifacts that haven't surfaced yet. So where does this leave us? We now have strong physical evidence of a sophisticated, ritually organized society living at Tadım roughly 6,000 years ago, practicing structured religious sacrifice, engaging in trade and property management through stamp seals, producing pottery styles connected to a much wider cultural network, and layering personal devotional practice on top of communal temple worship. Beneath that, we have evidence pushing organized economic activity back even further to 7,500 years ago. And above it all, we have a continuous, unbroken record of human settlement stretching from the Neolithic period all the way through the Ottoman era, sitting in a single hill that most people in the region probably walked past for years without a second thought. That is, in many ways, the real story behind discoveries like this one. It is rarely a single dramatic reveal. It is patient, careful digging, season after season, slowly peeling back layer after layer of a landscape that has been quietly holding on to its history the entire time, waiting for someone to look closely enough. Excavations at Tadım are ongoing, and researchers have made clear they expect more discoveries as work continues, so this is very likely a story we will be coming back to. Let's talk for a moment about why the late Chalcolithic and early Bronze Age matter so much to historians in the first place, because it helps explain why a discovery like this one carries so much weight. The Chalcolithic period, sometimes called the Copper Age, sits right at the hinge point between the Stone Age and the Bronze Age, a stretch of time when communities across the Near East were transitioning away from purely stone tools and beginning to experiment with metalworking, while also developing more complex social hierarchies, organized agriculture, and, as we are seeing at Tadım, formalized religious institutions. This was the period that set the stage for the first true cities and states that would appear in Mesopotamia not long after. A well-preserved temple from exactly this transitional window gives archaeologists a rare, direct look at how religious authority and communal identity were being built in real time, brick by brick and altar stone by altar stone. It also helps to understand the broader cultural context these people were operating within. The Nakhchivan style and Karaz style pottery found at Tadım both connect this site to what archaeologists broadly refer to as the Kura-Araxes cultural sphere, or early Transcaucasian culture, a wide-reaching network of related communities that stretched across the Caucasus, eastern Anatolia, and into parts of the Levant during the 4th and 3rd millennia BCE. This was one of the more remarkable cultural phenomena of the ancient Near East, a shared set of pottery styles, architectural habits, and burial customs spreading across an enormous geographic area, likely carried by trade, migration, and intermarriage between communities rather than conquest. Finding this pottery style at Tadım tells researchers that this small village on the edge of the Euphrates was not isolated at all. It was plugged into a cultural and economic network stretching hundreds of miles in every direction, exchanging not just goods, but ideas, symbols, and possibly even religious practices with communities it likely never had direct contact with. That regional connectivity also raises an interesting question that researchers are still working through: how much of what happened at this temple was a local tradition unique to Tadım, and how much of it reflects shared religious practices happening at other Kura Araxes and Chalcolithic sites across the wider region. Ritual sacrifice involving blood channels and altar stones has been documented at a handful of other early religious sites across the ancient Near East, though rarely with this level of preservation. That makes Tadım an unusually valuable comparison point. If similar architectural features start turning up at neighboring sites currently being excavated, like Tadım Fortress or the digs happening at Harput Castle, researchers may be able to start mapping out just how widespread these specific ritual practices actually were, rather than treating Tadım as an isolated case. There is also the human side of this story that is easy to lose in the artifact list. Every stamped seal, every spindle, every stylized figurine represents an actual decision made by an actual person thousands of years before written history existed in this part of the world. Someone carved that seal to mark a transaction they wanted protected. Someone spun wool on that spindle to make clothing for their family. Someone shaped those figurines with enough care and consistency that archaeologists can recognize a recurring stylistic tradition across multiple objects, meaning this wasn't random improvisation. It was a learned craft passed down between people, likely parent to child or master to apprentice, over generations. And someone, standing at that altar with the blood channel running beneath their feet, believed deeply enough in whatever they were doing that they built permanent architecture around it, maintained it, and returned to it again and again. That is really the emotional core of why discoveries like this resonate with people far beyond academic archaeology circles. It is not really about the shock value of a sacrificial altar. It is about the sudden, tangible reminder that 6,000 years ago, in a small village most of us had never heard of until this excavation made headlines, there were real people living full, complex lives, farming the land, spinning wool, trading goods, worshipping something bigger than themselves, and building structures meant to outlast them. In a very real sense, they succeeded. Their temple did outlast them, buried and protected under 35 meters of accumulated history, waiting patiently until a team of archaeologists finally reached the right layer. It is worth stepping back and comparing Tadım to other early religious sites people are more familiar with, because it helps put the discovery in perspective. Most viewers have heard of Göbekli Tepe, the massive stone enclosure site in southeastern Turkey, dating back roughly 11,000 years, often cited as the oldest known monumental religious structure in the world. Göbekli Tepe reshaped archaeology's understanding of when organized religion began, pushing it back before settled agriculture rather than after. Tadım is younger than Göbekli Tepe by several thousand years, but it fills in a different and equally important part of the story. Where Göbekli Tepe shows hunter-gatherers building religious monuments before farming was fully established, Tadım shows a settled agricultural community with trade networks, textile production, and property systems already in place, formalizing religion into a dedicated structure with specific architectural features built for repeated ritual use. In other words, Göbekli Tepe tells us religion may have come before agriculture. Tadım tells us what religion looked like once agriculture, trade, and social organization were already fully underway. Together, sites like these give archaeologists bookends on either side of one of the most important transitions in human history, from small mobile groups to fully settled organized societies. It also raises the question of why so much of this early religious architecture keeps turning up specifically in this part of the world, stretching from southeastern to eastern Turkey, through the Euphrates Basin, and into the Caucasus. Part of the answer is simply geography. This entire corridor sat at the meeting point of several major early cultural zones, close enough to Mesopotamia to absorb its influence, close enough to the Caucasus to trade with communities up in the mountains, and fed by a river system reliable enough to support permanent farming settlements year after year. Fertile land, a strategic trade position, and long-term settlement stability are exactly the ingredients that tend to produce complex societies, and complex societies tend to produce formal religious institutions once they reach a certain size and level of organization. Tadım appears to be a textbook example of that process playing out in the archaeological record. There is also a preservation angle worth mentioning, because it explains why this discovery only happened now, rather than decades ago. Mounds like Tadım Höyü accumulate their layers gradually, but they are also incredibly fragile in certain ways. Looting, agricultural activity, urban development, and simple erosion have destroyed countless similar sites across the region before archaeologists ever had the chance to properly excavate them. The fact that Tadım survived largely intact with its temple layer, its artifacts, and its Neolithic foundations still in place is itself a small piece of good fortune. That is part of why Turkish cultural authorities are treating ongoing excavation and preservation here as such a priority, running parallel projects at Harput Castle, Tadım Fortress, and Salkaya Village specifically, because they understand how easily windows like this one can close permanently if action isn't taken in time. Looking forward, the excavation team has indicated that work at Tadım is far from finished. With 3 distinct sacred hearths already identified in the deeper Neolithic layers, a fully mapped temple complex from the late Chalcolithic period, and clear evidence that even older material may still be buried beneath what has already been uncovered, this site is shaping up to be one of the more significant long-term excavation projects in eastern Anatolia. Combined with the parallel digs happening nearby, researchers are essentially assembling a regional map of how settlement, trade, and religion evolved along this stretch of the Euphrates corridor over roughly 7,500 years. Few single regions anywhere in the world offer that kind of continuous, physically documented timeline, and it is exactly why Elazığ province has quickly become one of the places serious archaeologists are watching most closely right now. If you enjoyed this one, let us know in the comments what mystery or discovery you want us to cover next. We take a lot of our topics directly from viewer suggestions, so if there's a dig, a ruin, or a historical mystery you have been curious about, drop it below, and it might end up in a future video. And if you haven't already, go ahead and subscribe and turn on notifications, because we are covering another fascinating discovery next week, and you will not want to miss it. Thanks for watching, stay curious, and we will see you in the next one.